Security. We will start this module by talking about authentication, authorization, and JSON Web Tokens. Later, we will learn how to dynamically hide content based on whether the user is authenticated or not. Then we will learn how to protect routes from unauthorized users. Later, we will configure identity in our application to allow users to register and log in. Finally, we will use claim-based authorization to only allow users with certain permissions to perform certain actions in our application. Let's start by talking about authentication and authorization. Until now, all of the endpoints of our Web API have been open, where anyone can access them. The same goes for our React components, where anyone can access any component. Certainly, this is not good, because there will be endpoints and components that we want only certain users to be able to access. For that, we can use authentication and authorization. Authentication is about a user showing credentials to verify his or her identity. Typically, these credentials are a username and password. So, to allow authentication on the React side, we will create a component through which our users can enter username and password and send that info to the Web API so that it can be validated against our user system. ASP.NET Core makes it easy for us to implement a user system using identity. With identity, we create the SQL Server tables necessary for our user system, as well as a set of auxiliary methods being at our disposal to handle different scenarios. After authenticated, our Web API will return a JSON Web Token. A JSON Web Token, or JWT, is a secure string that contains reliable information about the user. We say that it is secure because it is typically signed with a secret key, so you can be sure of the veracity of what the JWT contains. The JWT contains claims, which are information about the user, such as his name, email, and that kind of thing. Then, when the user wants to use protected endpoints of our Web API, he must send the JWT through a header of the HTTP request, and in this way, he will be able to validate himself as an authenticated user. A token is divided into three parts: header, data, and signature. As you can see on the screen, at the left we have the JSON Web Token, and at its right we have that same token decoded into its three parts, which are the header, which in this case contains the algorithm used and the type of token, then the payload, which is what contains the data of the user, like its name, email, and so on. And finally, the third part is related to the signature. So, our React application will receive this string that we have at the left, and then we will save it to use it in subsequent HTTP requests. Authorization refers to what a user is allowed to do. Sometimes it is not enough for the user to authenticate, as there are different types of user for our application. For example, a customer of our company is not the same as an employee. The employee will have extra permissions that the clients do not have. For example, we would like only special users to be able to delete movies. Then at the level of our Web API, we will use an authorization filter where we will indicate that only an administrator will be able to perform this operation. Similarly, at the React level, we will have controls so that only users who are administrators can see the delete movies button. In this way, we will improve the user experience by preventing the display of actions that the user cannot really use. In this video, we are going to work with a component that will allow us to display or hide something depending on the authentication state of the user. So, for example, if the user is authenticated and it is an admin, then we will display these edit and delete buttons. Otherwise, we are going to hide them. For now, we are going to start with an easy example. So I will come to Visual Studio Code and I will go to the Explorer I will open src and I will right click here, new folder, auth, enter, and in here I will create my authorized component. So I will say new file, authorized.tsx, and let's get to work. Let me say export default function authorized, and in here I will say props, authorized props. Then I need to receive some props. So let me say interface, authorized props. Then I will say authorized. This is what the user will see if he is authorized. So I will say here a React element and I will import that. Then not authorized. What will the user see if he is not authorized? But this will be optional. And then I will say here role, which will allow me to specify, for example, that the user must be an admin in order to see something. Sometimes, as we mentioned before, it will not be enough that the user is authenticated in order to be authorized. Sometimes the user must have some special credentials, like a role. With a role, I can say, well, this user is an admin, or this user is an employee, or something like that. So now let me come here, and what I want to do is to say return here, and I want to use a fragment here, and then I will do the following. I will have a state variable that will track if the user is authorized or not. For now, we're just going to hard code true or false, signifying that the user is authorized or not. But in the future, this will be a more complex logic. So let me say here is authorized, set is authorized equal to use state control dot to import that, and we're going to say false by default. Then I will use a ternary operator here, and I will say is authorized, ternary operator, props authorized, otherwise props not authorized. So as you can see, if the user is authorized, we're going to display some UI, otherwise we're going to display another UI. Alright, so let's make an example. Let's go to the landing page component and let's come here, and here above this H3 we're going to use our authorized component. So let me say authorized, and let me actually close this like this, and I will say here authorized, and here I can put some UI like you are authorized. Then I will do the same for not authorized. We're going to say here you are not authorized. Alright, let me save and let's see what we have. Let's come here, and you're going to see that we have you are not authorized. Alright, that is because here we have this false, which means that we are not authorized. So if I say true here, and let me save, and let's see that if we come here, we're going to have you are authorized, which is good. Now, let's work with claims in our React application. We have our authorized component. Right now, we have this state variable is authorized, which is controlling whether the user can see the authorized UI or the not authorized UI. That is fine, but we are missing something, and what we are missing is to use this role property so that we indicate if the user is, for example, an admin, then we want to display this authorized UI. Otherwise, we want to display this not authorized UI. So how are we going to do that? Well, for that, we will use claims here in our React application. So what we're going to do is that we're going to have a claim which will be a data type that will have a name and a value, and through those claims we will have information about the user, and one of those pieces of information is going to be the role of the user. So if the user has the admin role, then we're going to say that the user is authorized if we're asking for the user to have the admin role. So if I go to the landing page, and in here in authorized I say role admin, I need that the user has that admin claim. But there is a question, and it is, how is this component going to know about the claims of the user? For that, we are going to use a context. Remember that with a context, we are going to have a communication channel that will allow me to pass messages to different components and receive messages from those components. So we are going to have a context which will allow this authorized component to know if the user has claims. So let's do that. Let me come here, and first we are going to create that claim data type, because the context that we are going to create is going to use those claims. So right click here, new file, I will say auth.models.d.ts, and I will export a interface here, and I will call it, and this will be interface, and I will call it claim, and it will have a name, a string, and also a value, which is also going to be a string. Okay, so this is great. Now I have to create that context. So again here in the auth folder, I will say new file, and I will call it authentication context.ts, and let me come here, and let me say here import React from React, and also import claim, and this will be import claim from auth models, and then we're going to say const authentication context equal to react dot create context, and we're going to have an ad hoc data type here which will have claims and claim array here, and update, and this update function will allow me to update the claims through this context. That means that if there is a new claim, I can notify the whole application about that new claim. So let me say here claims, claim array, and void. So in here I need to pass the default value of this context, which will be a claims empty array and an update function that will do nothing, that will just do nothing. Then I will say here export default authentication context semicolon here. Alright, this is done. Now again through this context I will be able to read the claims of the user and update the claims of the user. Okay, so now let's go to the app component, because I need to use this authentication context. I am here in the app component because this is the parent component of all of our components, and from here it is that we want to distribute our claims, the claims of our users. So let me say here in this app component, I want to say const claims set claims. I need a state variable, because if we change the claims, then we want to change the UI. Because remember that components like authorized are going to update the UI. So let me say here use state control dot to import that, and let me say here claim array, and let me try to import that. It's not allowing me to, so let me just say import claim from, let me say auth here and auth models here, semicolon here, and let me say here this, and this will be a empty array by default. Now I need to use my context. So here inside of the browser router, I want to say authentication context dot provider, and let me close this, and let me also import this context. So authentication context from auth authentication context, and let me pass a value to this provider. So let me say value, and we need to pass here an object with claims and update equal to set claims. Remember that here in the authentication context we define this ad hoc interface here with claims and update. So this is what I am passing here, claims and update, and set claims will allow me to update the claims. So let me cut this from here, because I need to wrap everything inside of this new context that I am creating. And now I can save, and I can go back to Authorized, and here I can use a context, our authentication context. So let me say here const claims. From here I can say use context control dot to import that, and let me pass the authentication context. So authentication context, and let me import that, and from here I have the list of claims, and now I can use it. I can use a use effect. Let me say use effect control dot to import that. Let me pass a function, and let me put here as a dependency the claims, of course, because if we change the claims, this will fire, and then I want this use effect to fire again. So now here I can say if props role, then we will say that the user is authorized if the user has a role claim with the value being passed in this property. So let me say here const index equal to claims find index, and we will say here claim, and I want to say claim name equal to role, and claim value equal props role. And let me put that in another line so that you can visualize it better. So what we're saying here is that in the list of claims, look for a claim that has its name as role and the value is equal to the value passed in the role property. Just like here in the landing page, I am saying the role is equal to admin, then I am looking for a claim with a name role and a value admin. Now here I will say set is authorized, and we're going to pass index greater than -1. And in this way, if index is equal to -1, it means that the user doesn't have that claim and therefore is not authorized in this instance of the component. Otherwise, let me say else, if there is no role defined, then it is enough for the user to be authenticated in order to be authorized. So I will say here set is authorized, and I will say claims length greater than 0. Why? Because in our application, if the user has any claims, then it means that he is authorized. So let me say here that we have props role as a dependency. That is actually not going to change, but we can add it, props role, and that's it. Now I can save and I can go back to Google Chrome, and we can see that our application hasn't changed at all. But now we're using claims, and it means that we can identify if the user has this role, has the admin role. Let's see an example of that. First, let's go to the landing page, and let me remove this role admin just for now. Let me save, and let's come back here, and we're going to see that we're still not authorized. Why is that? Because I don't have any claims. So in order to have a claim, I have to go to the app component, and in here I will hardcode a claim. Don't worry, in the future these claims will come from a database, from our web API. For now we have to hardcode it. So let me say here name, and I will say email, and then I will say value, and I will say felipe@hotmail.com. Okay, this is my claim. So let me save, and now if I come back here, you can see that I am authorized. Alright, see? Now that I have a claim, I am authenticated according to my React application. But if I come back here, and let's go to the landing page, and let me add role admin one more time, let me save, and let's see that now I am not authorized because I don't have that claim. So if I come here to the app component, and I can clone this line, and I can say here in name I will put role, and in value I will put admin, save, and now let's go back here, and now I am authorized one more time, which means that indeed now we are centralizing the fact that the user is authenticated or authorized depending on the claims that the user has. Alright, so we're good to go on that one. Let me delete this because I don't want to be an admin just now. Let me now see that I am not authorized. So what I want to do next is to hide some of these menu items that we have here and these two buttons that we have here if the user is not an admin. So let me come here, let's go to the menu component, And in here, I will change the order of this. I want to put first filter movies, and after that I want to use my authorized component, and actually I don't have to put it like this, I have to close it like this. Now in here I will say authorized equal to expression, and I will put a fragment here, and then I will cut all of the menu items that should only be available for admin users. So let me paste this here, let me organize everything, and let me put here the role admin, save. And let's go back here and let's see that now in the menu we only have filter movies, because this is something that even an anonymous user should be able to do. Now let's do the same for edit and delete. Let me come here to individual movie component, which is where we have this link edit and button delete. So here I want to say the same, authorized. Let me close here, let me say right away role admin, and then authorized equal to fragment, and then we're going to say here, let me cut this, let me actually cut the whole div, and let me paste that here, let me organize everything, Shift Alt F, save. Let's go back here, and now as you can see, since I am not an admin, I can't see the edit and delete buttons. So we are good to go here. Now there is a problem. If I say /genres, and let me delete this and just go to genres, you are going to see that I am able to enter to genres. So let's fix this. In this video, we are going to learn how to protect a route. The idea is the following. I am here in this genres route, but I shouldn't be here because I am not an admin of my application. So how can we protect this? Well, let's remember that here in Visual Studio, in the app component, I have this logic that displays the routes. So what I will do is that I will go to the route config and I will configure each of the routes that are supposed to be protected from anonymous users. So that here I will have some logic that will say if the user is an admin and the route is protected, then we will show that component, otherwise we will not show it. So let's do that. Let me come to the route config, and in here we have our genres route. So here I want to say, comma, is admin equal to true. So let's say that I want to protect this route. So now only admins should be able to access this route, but I have to configure that. I have to come here and create a function that will allow me to determine if an user is an admin. So let me say is admin, then I will just say here return claims find index, and I will say claim name equal role, and claim value equal to admin, and this is greater than -1, and that's it. Now I can use that in here. I can say here that I will use a ternary operator, and I will use route.isAdmin. So this means if the route is protected, and if the route is protected and the user is not an admin, this is this isAdmin function that we have here, then ternary operator, we are going to say something like, let me say here, you are not allowed to see this page. Otherwise, we are going to put this route component in here. So again, what are we doing here? We're saying if the route is protected, if route is admin is equal to true, which means that if this route is protected and if the user is not an admin, then we're going to display to the user this UI. You are not allowed to see this page. Otherwise, if the user is an admin or if the page is not protected, then we're just going to display the page. And that's it. Let me save and let's come back here, and you're going to see that we have you are not allowed to see this page. So doesn't matter if I try to refresh, we are not going to see the page. But if I come here to this list of claims and I make myself an admin just to make a test, let me say role, and then let me say admin here, save. Let's come back here, and now I can see the page. So as you can see, we are definitely protecting a route by using this simple logic that we have here. So now let me delete this. Let's come back here. Let me save. Let's come back to the route config. And now I want to copy this and protect all of the other routes that should be protected. So create genre, edit genre. The list of actors should be protected. Create actor, edit actor. Let's do the same for movie theaters. Create movie theater, edit movie theater, create movie, edit movie, but not filter movies or movie details, because those are pages that any user should be able to see. Same goes for landing page and redirect to landing page. So let me save and let's come back here, and we have you are not allowed to see this page. But if I go to filter movies, you can see that I can come here, I can come to the landing page. I just can't go to pages like genres because I am not allowed to see those pages. Now we have been working with data in memory. It is time for us to build a real user system in ASP.NET Core. We will see that next. In this video, we are going to configure identity in ASP.NET Core. With identity, we have a set of APIs that will allow us to build a user system in a really simple manner, because we will only have to use those APIs to have our system working. With identity, we will be able to have our users authenticate and authorize in different resources of our application, and also we're going to be able to build the JSON Web Token that is the one that we're going to return to our front end so that users can authenticate themselves. So let's work on that. First, let's go to the application DB context, and in order to configure identity with Entity Framework Core, all that we have to do is to, instead of inheriting from DB context, we have to inherit from identity DB context. And let me press Ctrl- because we have to install a library called Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core. I will say find and install latest version, and this is going to go to NuGet. It will download the NuGet package and it will install it, and this is done. Something else that we need is to make sure that here in this on model creating, we have this base on model creating here. This is really important because the identity DB context is expecting to be called through this base on model creating. And since we have this here, we can go to the package manager console and we can add a new migration. I will say add migration, and I will say identity tables. I'll press enter. And as you can see, we have the migration here, and we have several tables that are going to be created. We have ASP.NET roles that save the roles in our database, ASP.NET users that save the users, and so on. So as you can see, we have a whole set of tables that will allow us to have a user system. So let's open the package manager console, because now I want to say update database to apply those changes into my database. And this is done. And if we go to SQL Server Management Studio and we go to our Movies API, we are going to see that we have now several tables like ASP.NET Role Claims, ASP.NET Roles, ASP.NET Users, and so on. So we definitely have those tables now. Now let's go back here because we need to keep working. Now we need to configure some services. Let's go to the Solution Explorer and let's go to the Startup class. We know we have to configure services in the configure services method here. So let me come down here and let's go down here, and here I will say services add identity. We need to add the identity services, and I need to pass two things, which are the data type that represents a user in our system, which is identity user for our case, console dot to bring this namespace, and also the data type that represents a role in our system if we want to use role, of course. So let me say here identity role, and I'll put that here, and now I will say add entity framework stores, and I will pass my application DB context, which is the one that inherits from the identity DB context, and finally let me say add default token providers. Now besides that, we have to add a configuration for authentication. The idea is that there is several ways to configure authentication. For example, you could use cookies, but that is not what we're going to do. We're not going to use cookies, we're going to use JSON Web Tokens. So we're going to use the JSON Web Tokens authentication scheme. And if you remember, we already have this add authentication, so I'll just move it here, down here, so it is close to this add identity. Now, in this add JWT better, we are going to configure the parameters for validating a JSON Web Token, because of course, we only want to accept in our application those JSON Web Tokens that we know that are valid. So I have to say here, options, token validation parameters equal to new token validation parameters, control dot to bring this namespace, and I will say here, validate issuer equal to false, validate audience equal to false. In our case, we're not going to use those, but we are going to use validate lifetime because we want to make sure that the token is not passed to its expiration time. Now, I will also use a validation of the signing key, which means that we are going to verify that the JSON Web Token is valid through the signing key. Speaking of signing key, let's configure that. Issuer signing key equal to new symmetric security key, and we're going to pass encoding, and we're going to say control dot, and we're going to say UTF-8 get bytes, and we're going to pass here a key that I will have in a configuration provider. I will say here key JWT, and I will put here a semicolon, and this is fine. Now we have to configure this key. So let's go to a configuration provider. We can go to the app settings.development.json, and in here, we can put it here. We're going to say key JWT, and for the value, we have to put a really long string. This is not going to work. This is not going to work if you just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example. No, you have to make a really long string, something like this. You can use a random string or something like that, but it has to be large enough, otherwise you are going to get an error. Now we have the key defined, so that is the key. This is, by the way, a secret key. You should not share this key with anyone, because then anyone could build a JSON Web Token that could say that the user is an administrator when that user is not. So definitely keep this really safe. Now finally we have to come here, and after this parameter we're going to say clock skew time span 0, and that's it. Now I can compile my application and our identity system is configured in our web API. Now let's work on a controller that will allow our users to log in and register into our application. In this video, we are going to build a controller that will allow our users to register and authenticate in our application. Also, through that controller, we will build the JSON Web Token that the front end will use to authenticate the user. So let's go to the Solution Explorer, and I will create a new controller here. I'll say class, and I'll say accounts controller, and I will inherit from controller base control dot to bring this namespace, and then I will say API controller and route API / accounts, and I will use dependency injection to bring the following services. We need the user manager class in order to create users, and here I will pass identity user, and I will say user manager control dot to initialize it as a field. Also, I need the signing manager to signing users. Let me pass the identity user, and I will say signing manager control dot to bring the namespace, and finally I need the iConfiguration control dot to bring the namespace from Microsoft Extensions configuration, and I will say configuration control dot to initialize it as a field. And now I will create two endpoints. The first one is going to be for creating users, so I will say HTTP post, and I will say here create, and then I will say public async task action result of authentication response, and I will say create, and here I will say from body user credentials, and now I will create these two DTOs. The first one, authentication response, is going to contain the JSON Web Token and also the expiration time of the token. So let me create a new class here, class. I'll say authentication response, and here I will have two properties which are a string token, the JSON Web Token, and also the time expiration. And now we have to come here. I will control dot here to bring the namespace. And now let's do the same for user credentials. Let's go back here to the Solution Explorer, right click here, add new class, and I will say user credentials. And in here, we are going to put the necessary information for the user to authenticate. I will say a string email and also a string password. And I need a required attribute here and also a email address attribute. And then I will say here required also. And this is done. Now we can come here and this is working. I can put this in another line so that you can see it better. And now let's work on this method. First, what I'm going to do is that I will instantiate a new identity user. So I will say new identity user, and I will say username equal to user credentials dot email, and also email equal to user credentials email, and that's it here. Then result equal to await user manager. As we said before, I am going to use the user manager to create the user. So create async, and I will pass the user and also the password. I will say user credentials password. And that's it. With this, we are creating the user. Now we need to verify if the operation was successful. So I will say result does succeeded, and then I am going to return the token. But if it wasn't successful, then I will say return bad request, and I will pass the errors. I will say result errors. Now, as we said here, we are going to return the JSON Web Token. So I am going to create a private method that will build that token. So let me say here authentication response build token, and I will say here user credentials. And first, as we said before, what we need is a list of claims. We remember that a JSON Web Token is composed in three parts. One of them is the payload data, and in that payload data we have a collection of claims. And we remember that a claim is a information about the user which we know is true. For example, I can put a claim about the user's email. Let me say bar claims equal to new list of claim, control dot to bring the namespace, and in here I can say new claim. I will create a new claim. I can create as many claims as I want, but I will just make one. I will say email here, and I will say the user's email is user credentials email, and that's it. With this, we have a claim that has the user's email, and this is important because this information now will be on the JSON Web Token, and then from the front end, I will be able to read this information. I will be able to know the email of the user. It is really important that you don't put here sensitive information like the user's password or something like that. Everything that you put here is accessible from whoever has the JSON Web Token, so it is important that you keep this short and you just put here the minimum necessary information that the front end needs. So I will just leave this with an email claim, and now I will build the JSON Web Token. I will say here key equal to new symmetric security key, control dot to bring this namespace, and I will say encoding, control dot to bring this namespace, UTF-8 get bytes, and I will say configuration, and I will pass the key JWT, which is the key for the JSON Web Token that we put in the app settings.development file. Key JWT. So let me put a semicolon here, and I will say creds of credentials, and I will say new signing credentials, and I will pass the key and also the algorithm, and I will use HMAC SHA-256. So let me say security algorithms dot HMAC SHA-256, and then I will say bar expiration. What is going to be the expiration time of the token? It could be 1 minute, 20 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 year, whatever you want. It depends on your application. For our case, I am just going to say datetime.utc now at years, and I will add 1 year. And after that, I will create a token. I will say token new JWT security token control dot to bring this namespace, and I will say issuer null, audience null, because we said we weren't going to be using those things. I will say claims, and I will pass this list of claims that I have here. So claims expires, I will pass the expiration time that I just built, and the signing credentials, the creds, and that's it. Now I can say return new authentication response, and then I will say token equal to new JWT security token handler write token, and then I will get a string representation of the token, and I will save it here in our token property of the authentication response class. And then I will say expiration equal to expiration, and that's it. Let me put a semicolon here, and that's it. Now we can come here and we can say return build token, and I will pass the user credentials, and that's it. Now let me create another endpoint, this one for login. So let me say HTTP post login, and I will say public async task action result of authentication response, and I will say login, and I will say here from body, and I will say user credentials and user credentials here, and let me say here bar result equal to await sign-in manager. We need to use the sign-in manager to log in a user. I will use a password signing async method, and I will say user credentials dot email, and I will also pass user credentials dot password. I'll say is persistent equal to false, because that is for cookies, but we are not using cookies. And lockout on failure. For testing, I will put this as false, but maybe in production you want to put this as true if you want to lock out users after trying too many times logging with a incorrect password. Now after that I will say if result succeeded, then I will say return build token, and I will pass the user credentials. Otherwise, I will say return but request incorrect login. Why are we saying incorrect login and not passing some sort of result errors? Because of security reasons, we should not give too much information about the reason why a login was incorrect. Like, we don't want potential hackers to know that a user exists with the email and that the password was wrong. We don't give information about those things, so we only give a generic error that says incorrect login. And that's it. Now we're ready to go to our front end and register our first user.